Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome to Muslim Network TV. I'm your host for Canada Today Youth Edition, Brother Muhammad Maxwell Hassan. Oh boy, do we have an action-packed episode just for you. Now, this $1 million question happens in Muslim families, and especially in North America. Do I put my kids in public school or do I put my kids in Islamic private schools? Which one is better? Which one is the best? How do I make sure that I make the right decision for my child, for my children's future? But as they say, the children are the future. We got to do things for the future. We got to do things for the youth. But, as everything, things are complicated. You got to make sure that you're informed and with the best knowledge possible. And to ensure that, especially with a conversation like this, talking about public versus private schools, we're going to be in for quite a treat. But mashallah, with us here today, we got two individuals who are going to be shedding some light and hopefully simplifying the process and giving you the information that you need to make the best decision for your child or children. With us here today is Brother Omar Zia. Mashallah, Brother Omar is an educator working with the Peel School Board in Ontario, Canada. He's a well-known khatib and lecturer in the GTA. He holds a BSc, BEd, and a Master of Education degree. He's an Ontario certified teacher specializing in English as a second language, special education, and guidance counseling. Brother Omar Zia currently works as a vice principal at Streetsville Secondary School in Mississauga and teaches part-time with Queen's University. Brother Omar had the honor of studying Islam under numerous well-known Muslim scholars in the Toronto area, and mashallah, with a resume like that, super stoked and happy to have you, Brother Omar, to shed some light on the public sector side of things, or the public school side of things, for us here today. Also with us, we have Sister Hanaa Rashid. Mashallah, she holds a Master of Education from Mount St. Vincent University and has a Master of Social Work from Dalhousie University, from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Mashallah, all the way on that coast. It's amazing. Sister Hanaa has volunteered in the Halifax community for over 20 years, holding it down for 20 years. She has several years of experience working with children, adults, and families in various settings like hospitals, community centers, settlement services, and Islamic schools, to mention a few. She holds a special interest in supporting Muslim parents and children. She uses a holistic approach when working with people and also takes into consideration the cultural contexts when working, which affects individuals and families. She's a trained restorative practices facilitator and believes in the power of restorative conversations for fostering relationships, resolving conflicts, and building communities. She's an associate counselor with Serene Heart Counseling and is presently working in Milton, Ontario. Mashallah, it's a huge pleasure to have you with us here today. Also, Sister Hanaa, your insights are going to be truly appreciated. So let's always go ladies first. As always, with this show, I always want to share, I'd like the guests to share their story just to see how people got to where they are. It's always fascinating. It's a great way for people to get to know the person that's here. So Sister Hanaa, if you can kindly share with the viewers, how did you end up where you are today? How did you discover that working and supporting with Muslim parents and children was what you always wanted to do? What's your story?
I'm still muted. Am I unmuted now?
You're good.
I'm good? Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for this opportunity to be here. I think I'm going to speak just a little bit about my background, and then maybe I can speak more to the Islamic school part of this, because that's why I'm here. So I started to work in an Islamic school setting about, 19 years ago. And it was at a time I was a stay-at-home mom, because that's the first priority. I feel that is my duty. I have older children now. And at that time they were younger and they were going to middle school, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to give back. So I had this opportunity to be in a private Islamic school. It was right after Hajj, so I'd started wearing hijab and I wanted to be safe. And there was a struggle also in getting into mainstream organizations. So for me, it was a great segue. I was able to use some of my skills, and I came to the Islamic school. While I was there, I noticed that, and this I'm talking like 19 years ago, right? There weren't a lot of Muslim educators. There weren't a lot of trained teachers. there were struggles in that area of just, teaching and providing the curriculum. And as I spent 3 years there, I decided to go back to school. And so I was a mature student. I did my first master's, and then I did another master's. And then fast forward 19 years later, here I am again, and I find my way back in a private school setting. And I'm not going to be naming the private school that I have worked in the last few years, just because I'm not going to polarize myself with any specific organization. I'm speaking more today to be helpful, first of all, to provide information. And I don't want to say one thing over another, like even the verses, such and such versus such and such, that's okay. But I'm hoping this is not going to be a wrestling match. This is really about us, working together and to inform our community. So that's kind of where I'm at. I really enjoy being in that environment because it felt like a family. And it's like a community. So this is the big thing about being in an Islamic school setting. The people around you become your, part of you. They're part of you, and the children become part of you. And as I worked with them, I realized how much I enjoy it. So this has been part of my journey, and hopefully we'll have fun talking about it.
No worries. No fists will be thrown or anything of that nature. We're not. It's not a competition. It's all about collaboration. But for sure, thank you, Sister Hanaa. As we dive more and unpack this whole conversation, especially exploring some of your experiences with the Islamic schools, by all means, it's going to be tremendously valuable. I'll take it to you, Brother Omar. MashaAllah, you climbed the ranks. You're now a vice principal. How did that happen? How did you find yourself in this field of education? What's your story?
Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me on your show here. And thank you to all the participants who are tuned in. My journey towards education in general, towards going into the teaching profession, really is something that is part of my family. Several members of my extended family are teachers, and my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was responsible for setting up schools in rural Pakistan during the time of independence of Pakistan itself, 1947. And so what I have, basically the influence from those members of my family have propelled me towards this profession. And what I found very early on, 21 years ago now, when I first started, is that students, they really need a lot of support. Families need a lot of support. Our community can only develop if we are able to provide the best support possible to ensure that students succeed. And success, I learned very early on, is not just academic success. But what I have learned from working with students and with parents and with communities is that success takes on the emotional aspect, the social aspect, physical development, and of course, spiritual development as well. And as I've gone through a wide variety of schools around the Peel region, I do work for the Peel District School Board. What I have learned is that the role of the teacher can become a lot more influential depending on different positions that a person can hold. So whether you're a teacher in the classroom, a department head of a certain department, and also then if you move into administration, your voice counts a lot more. And so this is what has propelled me towards this journey, getting into administration, was so that I can make things better for all students. I do have a bit of a social justice lens with me, so I do look after and try to help our racialized students, because I find that they're traditionally, historically marginalized. And so this has formed a lot of the reason I moved into administration as well. But in general, I mean, the biggest takeaway for myself in terms of being in this profession is the ability to teach others, not just the lessons in a book or the curriculum, but really how to live life to the best that we possibly can, and using my own lived experience to share nuggets of wisdom that I've learned from others around me to help students and families get through secondary and to post-secondary, and then really to begin their life on the best journey possible.
MashaAllah. So I don't want to say you were born into it, but it runs through your family's veins, MashaAllah, that education has been really into it. So I'm going to still stick with you, Brother Omar, for this next question, especially now. Let me preface this by painting a picture first. Let's say this is a Canadian show, but let's broaden this out to North America. So North American Muslim families, you're here. And when they say the word public school, a lot of connotations come with it. And let's say you have a parent, a Muslim family, they're looking at it and they're looking at this as a viable option. Okay, well, public school, I mean, it's there. If I can ask you, Brother Omar, in your experience, just based on what you've gone through and what you've seen, what are some common patterns or trends that you've noticed among Muslim families in the way in which they view public schools?
Thank you for the question. So my experience is a bit, is quite wide. I have actually worked in a private Islamic school, but not here in North America. I've actually worked in Saudi Arabia for a short time. So that's part of my lens as well. And I have worked, because I'm working the Peel District School Board, I have worked in schools where the vast majority of students are Muslim. And the board itself, the highest faith identity is Muslim in this board itself, based on the student census data that just came out. And because of the schools I've worked in, I have interacted a lot with Muslim families. I've also had the pleasure of working with several private schools in and around the GTHA to support them and their teachers in terms of understanding how Ontario curriculum works, how assessment and evaluation works at the secondary level, and also at the elementary level. And it is, I've also taught from grade 3 all the way up to, well, as you mentioned, the university. I've actually taught at U of T, York, and now specifically just looking at Queen's University because it's hard to juggle everything at the same time. And what I have learned and what I've seen is schooling is schooling, whether you're in a private setting or a public setting, and whether that private setting is Islamic school or non-Islamic school, just a regular private setting. And in a public school, whether you have the majority of students who are Muslim or not Muslim, schooling is schooling. And there are a wide variety of challenges that come along with schooling. And while we look at public school or schools in general as maybe having or being the source of problems that exist, in that teenage years, in those teenage years, we need to also understand that because kids are teenagers in a school setting, those problems are also part of their own development. And we look at the elementary grades, that's also part of their development. And as Sister Hanaa mentioned, she's in that field specifically. And so child development, as it goes from year to year, even month to month for that matter, there are a wide variety of developmental milestones that occur. And so kids are growing up in schools. And as a result, you're going to find all of these problems no matter where you are in the world, or again, no matter which kind of school you choose. Now, to your question about what are some of the trends or concerns perhaps that Muslim families exhibit or question or ask about when it comes to public schools. And I have worked with Muslim families coming out of an elementary private Islamic school, now choosing the best appropriate secondary school for them to go to, because sometimes they can't afford to send them to a secondary Islamic school, or they're just not available depending on where they're living. So some of the concerns have always been around faith identity. How will they hold on to their faith? Does it make a difference having a Muslim teacher in the school, or does it make a difference having a wide array of Muslims, other students in the school identifying as Muslim? If they have an MSA, Muslim Student Association, or Muslim Student Alliance in the school, how's that going to impact their faith identity? What else are they going to be exposed to? For those who identify as Muslims, we do understand there are several major sins that we want to ensure that our students, our kids are protected from engaging in, or being exposed to. And that's always a concern, whether they see that in their day-to-day socializations within the school classrooms or in the hallways, or whether that's part of the curriculum itself. And some of the exploratory parts of the curriculum may also involve students learning about things that are not necessarily congruent with their faith identity. So that's also a bigger concern for parents. Another area is substance abuse. What's the mental health support available in the school? And if my child does become mentally unhealthy, what might happen to them? The availability of drugs or alcohol. And if you're in the Canadian context, because marijuana is now legal for those 18 and above, it can become much more easily to attain for those students in high school or middle school. And they're having several documented cases, especially with edibles, with marijuana. So that's an area of concern for parents as well. Despite all those social, emotional issues, there's always the academic pressure too. Parents want to ensure that their child will go to a good school that has a good academic reputation, that has the vast majority of the students going to a university, or at least attaining a degree program, whether that's at university or college. So that's another concern that parents do have. They want to ensure that the school that their child is going to is safe, socially, emotionally, physically, and that they have the making sure that another area might be gangs as well, especially looking at the North American context. There are gangs across the GTHA. In some schools, even the Peel region, do have gangs, gang affiliation. So that's an area of concern. But then the academic pressures as well. So these are, in general, some of the areas that that parents do have concerns about.
Mashallah, man, that's a lot to unpack there. So from what I gathered, a lot of it has to do, like, it's centered around faith, identity, and exposure. What are you being exposed to? What are the kids being exposed to, and much more. Paul, that's a great way you kind of framed the whole conversation with those concerns. I'll take it to Sister Hanaa. If I can ask you, let's look at it from the private Islamic school side. What are some common things that you've noticed, or some things that you've observed as a trend that a lot of Muslim families are looking at, or how they view private schools?
So again, there's going to be a lot of variety in terms of Islamic schools. And I can only speak to some of the experiences that I've had, and I do not want to paint all schools with that same brush, especially private schools. I want to be very careful of that. So that disclaimer is just out there right now, that I'm not speaking about one particular Islamic school because I don't know what happens in other schools. But in general, I want to speak about my own experience, because I'm first generation Canadian and I've raised my children who are now second generation Canadian. And as a parent, it was always a worry for me because I did not enjoy my school experience in Canada. If somebody said, that go back to high school, I would say, no, I never want to do that again. So that it left a really bad impression on me to be in that environment. So I never wanted it for my children. So for my children, I opted for a private school setting, which wasn't Islamic. It was actually a Catholic school, because I was looking for that safety. That safety is important to me. And then also I looked for an all-girls environment. This was another thing, because I have daughters. I wanted to have that protection for them. So this is just to give a bit of context why parents will look at any kind of private school setting. I think, when I worked with some of the refugee families, because I did have the privilege of working in a settlement agency, and I worked with the Syrian refugees when they came, that was one of the questions they asked me. They said, can we send our children to an Islamic school? We don't want to send them to public school. They're going to lose their faith. So I think Brother Omar spoke to that. They were very, very concerned about the identity, about the language, about, them practicing. So there are valid concerns when you don't know what's going to happen to your children. And most immigrants will speak to that they come to Canada for a better life. That's really the reason for moving and bringing everything with them. It's a very hard decision to make, but it's for their children. So when they come here and then they see that whole, there's a bit of a Pandora's box, what happens in public schools, but there's also good. There's a lot of support, there's a lot of resources, which the private school setting does not provide. What the private school setting will give is that safety and security, and, that, like I mentioned before, that community feeling and that sense of knowing people and having a more connectedness, because sometimes if it's a really big school, you can get lost. And that's a big problem for some newcomers. So I hope I've answered your question. I'm just thinking if I've missed anything. Please, if I've missed anything, let me know.
Mashallah, no. So from what, correct me or if I'm wrong with this analogy, speaking to that last point about feeling that community, it's almost like public schools an ocean and private schools are like a pond where it's easier for people to get to. Is that a fair, accurate illustration there to demonstrate? Like it's more small, but I think it speaks to it. I think one of the common threads for this whole conversation is all about what you make of it, whether you're in public school or in private school. It's all about what you do with it. So we'll still have to explore a bit more about each side, just to kind of get more of a holistic sense of what viewers can take away from. If I bring it back to you, Brother Omar, let's ask you for, based on your experience with the public sector or the public school side with Peel District School Board, let's say there's some misconceptions that occur. You mentioned there are some things about identity that you mentioned gangs. That's like a possibility. Exposure to certain things. Are there any misconceptions that Muslim families that you've encountered that you're like, whoa, this is like what you've heard is like way off? I mean, like for just to give you an example, when people they say university life is all this, that, and the other, but when you actually get into it, you're like, the movies are one thing, but come to reality, man, you're hitting the books. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it is what it is, right? It's like the glamour and the sensationalization in movies of what college life is all about is vastly different from what is in reality. So similarly, are there any things or held beliefs that Muslim families have about public school where you're like, they're up here, but you know what, actually it's this? Are there any common misconceptions that you've come across that you want to kind of chip away at? Yeah, brother Omar. Okay, well, okay. As always, let's see if he's in good shape. If he's not, I'll ask that question to you, Sister Hanaa, if I can. But just flip the public to private, if I may.
If you could just repeat the question, sorry.
Yeah, so what are some commonly held misconceptions that you've encountered across, like with Muslim families, with regards to private schools that people may have faced? All right, brother Omar is here. Okay. Are you okay, brother Omar? You got the question? I'm sorry, sister, to bounce back in. You're okay? You're good? All right.
I'm the only one using it, but sometimes just got not
all good. Yeah, you can go. Take it away.
Okay, apologize. So thank you. So yes, if anybody grew up in the Canadian culture as myself, you might be familiar with a TV program called Degrassi Junior High and Degrassi High, and it's taken on different renditions throughout the times. In fact, if anybody is familiar with Drake was also a star on the more recent editions of that show. The high school I went to, several of my classmates were actually in the original Degrassi Junior High and Degrassi High. And those kind of TV shows, and some of you might be familiar with something called Boston Public. There was a recent movie with Ice Cube in it called Fight After School or something like that. A movie called Lean on Me. A wide variety of these movies and these Hollywood versions of what high school might be like. And if you saw any of those, I think I would be afraid to go to any high school myself. And the reality is, as was mentioned there, is that this is not the reality of high school. Yes, you do have issues happening here and there, but they're not happening all the time or everywhere. And you can definitely go into school and never even see or notice any parts of these detrimental parts of society. I think what the onus comes down to, if I'm going to advise families about, if you have these concerns, go and visit the school, go and visit the community. Whenever I go to a new school, and I've taught at a number of schools across the Peel region, I actually go to the plazas. I mean, if you want to see cultures anywhere, go to the plaza, see how people act on the weekend, find out the demographic of people living around that school and in the community, and see how they act, how they interact. And that sometimes actually kind of calms a person down. Do a walkabout in the neighborhood, take a tour of the school, learn more about what's happening in the school, ask questions of the administration there, and they can share that information with you in terms of, are there really gangs going on? Are kids like skipping class all the time? And are they on drugs and showing up high all the time or drunk all the time? Is that really happening? And I think you'll find more often than not that that's not the case. And I really do encourage you to reach out to your schools and your school administration. It's important to take the word from the people working in the building rather than listen to rumors, rather than listen to other people who might have an inkling or an idea or heard about this, heard about that. Go to the source. And I've worked in schools where they've had bad reputations because one time, 30 years ago, there may have been a stabbing in the community or a shooting in the community that happened 30 or 40 years ago, and that has just stuck part of the reputation of a school. And it's important to know that when things happen so long ago and they have no context with them, we can't take that hearsay. So really go out there and try to find out more about what's going on in the schools. And again, try not to take that Hollywood version of what you might think be happening in high schools. It's very rare to find all of those crazy problems happening in one school. You might find one of those problems happening in one school, right? So, if you look at Boston Public as an example, if you've seen that TV show a few years ago in the late 90s, you could take all those problems in that show and spread it over maybe 50 to 70 schools. Like it's not as rampant as we think. And if you do have an instance in schools, they happen like once in a while, not every single day. You're not walking to school seeing fights and things happening all the time.
Man, I'm just sorry, but not all one package, man.
We all be running for the hills.
Yeah, man. All one big package. Everything, what any conceivable problem in one school. Man, I don't know what to say. And you mentioned Degrassi. That's another school. Man, Paul, that's amazing, man. But yeah, I like what you're saying. Don't just believe what you know. What does it say? Believe half of believe nothing what you believe nothing what you hear and only half of what you see. Like you gotta verify. People like to sensationalize and say, oh, you know, this school, guess what, this, that, and the other, and they just talk it out. And man, it's fun. Good point. Like actually go in there, see it for yourself. First-hand experience always beats second-hand. You know what I mean? Like, so it's good to take advice, see the reputation, see a review. Mashallah, we're in this culture of reviewing everything. So look and see, scour around, look at what the situation is, but go into it with eyes open and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make my own conclusion. Yeah, you can hear from different opinions, but like a restaurant, you can go to the exact same restaurant and you get two completely different experiences, right? So similarly, I suppose with that analogy with the school. So Masha, I really wanted to hammer home that point about not just believing whatever you hear and just that's it, accepting it as a truth. You got to go take the tour, see what is out there, like get a sense of it for yourself. So mashallah, great. If I can take it to you, Sister Hanaa, again, same question, flip the context with private schools, please.
And is this still common patterns that we've noticed amongst parents?
So pretty much like common misconceptions people have out there. Like what do you find parents? They say this is what Islamic schools are, and this is where they actually are in your experience. Of course, everyone's different. Of course, you don't want to generalize, paint everyone with the same brush. But just based on your years of experience, what have you seen over and over and over again that rings to be true to you?
Right, and because I've had that experience of seeing different provinces and schooling in those provinces, that's why I spoke to my own experience of high school in a public school setting. It would be very different in Ontario because there's so much diversity here. So the diversity adds to a layer of acceptance in some places. But in terms of private schools, I think that the misconception is that yeah, well, they are. It's not a misconception. They are expensive because parents have to pay out of pocket for tuition fees, and they think that these are money-making machines, which is a huge thing. That yes, the tuition is high, but not as high as it would be if people had to pay for public schools. I mean, our taxes pay for those schools, but the government allots about $12,000 to $11,000 per child for them to go to school in a public setting, and that varies from province to province. But most Islamic private school fees are, if anything, a quarter of that. And even then, people say it's too much, it's too expensive. So I want people to really think about those tuition fees, because private schools Islamic private schools in Ontario are not funded by anything other than the tuition fee revenue or donations. So most of those tuition fees go to the running of the organization or the paying of the salaries of teachers and other incidentals. And right now with COVID, there's a huge chunk of that goes towards sanitization and maintenance. So, that's just speaking to a little bit about the fee structure. So it is a privilege to go to a private school, and it's a choice. And I always say that this is not something that somebody has to do. There is a very excellent way to get an education in Canada, which is a right for children, and it's publicly funded. But if parents decide to take them to an Islamic school, they have to understand that fee structure has to be there to, pay for things. Another thing I wanted to mention is that parents often, when they now are paying for a service, they become consumers, right? It's become a business. So when they come into that mind frame, we go somewhere, we go to a restaurant, we order a meal, we want the best service, we want everything perfect, we want our meal hot, we want it tasty. So we become, wanting that tailor-made piece there. So, that's tricky. That's tricky because school is school, as Brother Omar said very eloquently, that when parents send their children to Islamic school, there's still that factor that there are other children there. They have to follow curriculum. They have the other rules that are in place. Things cannot be tailor-made for certain students, or even that favor that sometimes parents want. Oh, can you please do this for my child because you're my brother and your sister, kind of thing. So that's one of the things I've come across. I think the other thing is sending children to Islamic school. Parents think, okay, now I don't have to do anything. Off my kids go to an Islamic school. They're going to be, and I'm going to use air quotes, good Muslims, because now the school's going to take care of everything. And unfortunately, that's not the way it works with Islam. You and I, we all know that Islam is just a way of life, and it comes from home first. So this is a big misconception that, okay, you're going to take it off your plate and just have the school take care of all the issues. So, I could say a lot more on this, but I'm going to leave it at that. Okay.
Mashallah. I wanna expand that last part. I want to bring Brother Omar to this as well. Like that, I've heard it been put like this. I want to share an analogy that I've heard when it comes to this, is that sometimes perhaps people might look at their kids, like sending them to an Islamic school, speaking to the whole idea of they will magically become good Muslims afterwards, like they're going to be free from sin, everything, they're going to know everything. Like it's almost like the analogy I heard was almost like a microwave. You just pop them in the like in this microwave, you set a timer and then out. So dismissal time, like it's like you drop them off at the the arrival time. And then when they are done, like at the end of dismissal time, it's like everything is good to go, right? And it's ready. Now, speaking to that, I've heard, two sides of this. For the Islamic school side, it may be fairly obvious. Your curriculum is built on Islamic foundations, the subjects that are being taught, the teachers there, the environment is there. Fair enough. That's one side of it. But when it comes to, let's say, what if you, again, there's no right or wrong, I would say, but just exploring different perspectives. What do you say to the parents who may be thinking, or their train of thought is, we are living in a society where everyone is open, like where you're meeting different people. You're better off strengthening them inside an open society as opposed to bubbling them into this world, and you're actually making it worse, because if all they see around them is, let's say, the Islamic school environment, that's one thing. And then let's say the moment they reach high school, the whole world is exposed, and then it's like all that training, quote unquote, is gone. So I'm going to speak to you, Brother Omar, about that. Like, what would you say for parents who maybe they say it's better to strengthen, like, quote unquote, like increase it, like they should be ready and equipped to handle the world without the safety net of being in an Islamic environment? I'm wondering, have you ever come across something like that before, or this train of thought?
I have. I've come across this not just with Muslim parents or Muslim families, but also non-Muslim families as well. For families who identify with a faith, that faith does govern a lot in terms of how they view the world, the lens by which they view everything in the world, and it also governs what they think is right and wrong. And for the most part, you're going to find that all faith-based communities all have the same rights and wrongs. It's part of what we call fitra, right? But something all human beings have been born with. So what I have come across are people who identify with a different faith other than Islam, as well as those who identify with Islam, concerned that the school system in general, the public school system, is not doing enough or anything with regards to character development. And there's an expectation oftentimes from parents that schools should be taking on every aspect of character development. And as Sister Hanaa just mentioned in her expression there, is that when we, as public school educators, we can take a look at what the parents are requesting, but the reality is, at the end of the day, it's the curriculum that we are there to teach. It's the academics that we are there to provide to the students, and that the experiences they have socially, emotionally growing up in a school system are going to be part of their upbringing, part of their child rearing. And this is not necessarily within the purview of education as a concept within North America. Having taught overseas, I would also say the same thing, that working inside of an international school in Saudi Arabia, which was a K-12 school, again, the focus is on curriculum, preparing students for the O-level, A-level exams, and that really governs how we approach the classroom. So what I would like to mention here is that in terms of the parental role of a teacher in a public school system, the Education Act of Ontario doesn't call teachers teacher. It calls them in parentis locus. That's the actual title, in parentis locus, which is Latin for the local parent. It means that while children are at school, the teacher in the classroom, the administrators governing the school, are like parents, and they're there to make sure that children are safe, emotionally, socially, and academically. They're succeeding, and to provide that safety, to provide that nurturing and that love, and to work towards a sense of belonging as part of the overall picture of student success, and to build and inspire hope and confidence in our students who attend our schools across North America. So there is some there is some room for development of character, and there, especially in the elementary grades, you will find a lot of that happens from teachers towards their students, teaching them how to share and care and how to cooperate and how to not become a poor sport, so on and so forth. In the high school setting, you'll find that happening more or less amongst kids themselves, or through sports activities or clubs, where teachers are then in a position to not necessarily focus on curriculum, but focus on building relationships with their students. So, but the point is that there is some room for that, and teachers are in parentis locus, the local parent for those 7 to 8 hours a day. But who's the real parent? Who's the actual parent? That's where the child rearing happens in the home environment. So the onus actually goes back to the parent for character development. And I mentioned character specifically because as Muslims, we understand that the Prophet ﷺ said, I came for no other reason than to perfect good character, which is Sahih, it's in Ahmed, the Musnad of Imam Ahmed. So it's basically encompassing defining the entire religion of Islam into one principle, which is improving our character. So that does fall within the purview of parents in the home environment, because parents are the primary caregiver, and they are the first educator of the child. From the time that they're born to the time that they leave this earth, it is a parent who's always educating the child, sharing wisdom, sharing lived experience, and helping their child become the best person they can be. Not the best at math, not the best at science, not the best at English, but the best person they can be. So yes, schools do have a part to play, but the onus would go back to the home environment.
MashaAllah. Wow, I don't know what. Look at that. The best person that you could be, man. You got to write that in gold. It's not about being the best, careers, fill in the blank there. The being the best person. SubhanAllah, man. And news to me about the parental local parents, mashallah, like learn a little bit of Latin here today. That's really neat. I never thought of that. Like, I guess it's usually the whole, sit down, read the textbook, here's a test, here's your grade, and then Assalamu alaikum, right? That's not, it's much more than that. That's really cool. Like, you broaden the term of a teacher, and it's so much more. And subhanAllah, like if it's, there's so much there. Like, mashallah, it's amazing, brother Omar. If I can take it to you, sister Hanaa, as well, like with again with that whole analogy or that whole line of thinking in terms of, let's say, people, or if Muslim parents or families, I should say, bubble wrap their kids in a private school, thinking that this is going to be the surefire way to ensure that my son or my daughter is going to be protected and safe and secure. Can you speak to that line of thought based on your experience, if I may? Like, what are some things that you've noticed about that?
So I already spoke to one of the reasons that I put my children in a private school was because I was looking for that safe environment. And if we look at numbers, like I think in Ontario, I don't have research on Islamic schools, but I do tend to see that parents of girls worry about them. They worry about them. They do want to tend to bubble wrap them. And I think in our present environment of what's happening, there's a lot of fear around Islamophobia and, the hijab, the niqab. So yes, in some ways, the Islamic school setting will provide that safety because, it's easy for girls to go to a place where people get them, and it's easy for them to come in and dress the way they want. Again, this is a conversation that parents should have with their children. No one should force anybody. And that's sometimes what happens in an Islamic school environment when we are talking about uniform and, conformity and identity. So for me, because that's the social worker lens, I don't believe in forcing anyone. We all have choices, but it is a matter of a safe environment for girls in that way. And I think when students get to high school, that's where more of the challenges tend to take place. I know we want to talk to bullying, want to talk to those things. They happen anywhere. It doesn't matter what school it is. Kids are kids. They're going to do these things. It's how we're going to navigate it. How are we going to be those role models in their lives? How are we going to educate them? How are we going to develop the character? So I've spoken to a few things without really naming them, but in some ways, yes, there's safety, but in other ways, there's all the other things that happen in any other school.
So, mashallah, you have to look at things with eyes open, I suppose. It doesn't, mashallah khair. So we got two last questions here. Mashallah, as always, all good things must come to an end. But for our viewers, I just want to leave you with two last things. If I can start with you, Sister Hanaa, can you kindly share some resources out there? Let's say there are Muslim parents who are watching this show and they're saying, okay, I need some help. I need some guidance. I'm going to pose it to you, Brother Omar, as well. But Sister Hanaa, if I can ask, are there any resources out there that you could point towards? Let's say there are some parents who are leaning towards the private school idea. Are there any resources out there? Is there, something that you can showcase and say, hey, you know what, this has been really helpful, or maybe advice in terms of resources to helping parents navigate through that decision-making process?
So it comes back on to the individual in terms of resources. I don't know if there's a list out there of all the Islamic private schools and their ratings. I know the Fraser Institute was one of the categories that people would look at, and there are a few private schools on there that people are like, yep, that's the school my kid's going to go to. I think people have to look at their own finances. Number one, finances are a huge stressor for most folks. So they have to look at their own budget. I'm going to use a little bit of CBT here about writing things down, looking at the pros and cons of stuff, writing down what are their reasons that they're looking at private school. What is it they want? What are their expectations? And Brother Omar mentioned this about, it's not about academics all the time. It's about being a person, a human being in this society, and what are they looking for? So I think in terms of resources, they'd have to do research, talk to people, word of mouth, look at communities, what's happening, where are they living, what's going on in that local area, what's happening in the masajids, what are people talking about? So it's really making those connections, networking. We do have a gap in terms of services and understanding Muslim services in GTA. There's like so many. I was blown away when I came here, but there wasn't one place where I could go and find everything. I had to ask and I had to do my own due diligence. So I just suggest to parents that they do that because I don't think there's any set resource that I can say. I want to suggest the other thing is that look at the distance, because most Islamic schools are not really in that neighborhood. There's a considerable amount of travel that's involved if they decide to put their child in another school. Any private school, actually. So to take that into consideration, because that's another thing that used to blow me away, is I'd be in the car all day driving. This is GTA. You could spend your whole day traveling. So with young people, part of their life is already in school, and then the other part of their life is sitting in a car getting to and from. So I want people to think about location. Then also when you're not in your neighborhood school, peers, friends, extracurricular, all of that has to be taken into consideration too. How accessible is that going to be for your child? Or if you're a working parent, how easy is it going to be for you to drop and pick your child? I think I mentioned about the extracurricular, that's limited. Just looking at my notes, make sure I've covered some of the things. There's limitations in courses in some schools, which public schools, they offer a whole lot more. That's another thing to consider. So when students get to the high school level and they have to get their credits in and they have areas of interest, not all private schools will have that option. So that's definitely to be taken in. The classes are still mixed. It's co-education. So all the other dramas and issues that come with boys and girls going to school together is going to be there. So I just want to put that out there. So that's still there. You're not going to be able to bubble wrap your children from those typical experiences that they're going to have. And then the idea of the community. What happens is when we are always with the same people, it's like family. You're always seeing the same people. You go to their houses. Now you're going to school with them if you're in a private school because they're your friends, they're your family friends, they're your cousins. It's just like a family. If you've got issues, then those issues follow you everywhere you go. So you keep seeing that same circle of people wherever you go. And for some children, that does become problematic at some point because I want to expand my horizon. And it is true. I do encourage parents to look at for their own children's sakes, the more experiences they can offer them, the better it is. So that's a little bit.
Oh, wow, look at that. So I mean, one of the biggest takeaways is that gap. Like, there's no like central place or website that people can point to and say, yeah, this is going to be this is an opportunity for anyone watching. Hey, why not? If anybody can put together some sort of giant list or something of that nature, hey, it's an opportunity to serve the community at large. Tremendous reward for that. So that's great, Masha. It looks like at the end of the day, it's like you got to make your own checklist and you got to do your own due diligence to make sure what's best for you in the Islamic private school context. But Brother Omar, I'm speaking from a public side of things. I'm assuming there are things out there. No, it's easier to find. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Is there anything that you could point towards? At least you can guide parents for those who are saying, hey, look, I want to enroll my child in a public school. Like, where do I go? What's the first step? Like, what resources could you point towards?
Thank you. So there isn't, again, for the public school system, I wouldn't say that there's one giant resource bank that's available online or anywhere that people can access all the information in one place. However, every Board of Education does have its own website. And on that website, you'll find particulars about any given school and which neighborhoods they are in, names of principals, the number of school students in that school. If some of the boards have done student census.
Yes, all right, no worries. I'm sure. Yeah. So actually, speaking to that point that Brother Omar was talking about with regards to the different websites, yeah, it's almost like it's streamlined. Yeah, like it's depending on which area you're in, you can see it for yourself. So this is something that is good for families. If they see a particular school, then we're good to go. Yeah, Brother Omar. Yeah, come on.
Again.
Technology, like I always say, technology can be a blessing or a curse. It's all good. No worries. Come on, we'll go. Continue.
Thank you. So boards of education, you have the websites and you go into individual schools. What I would caution against is, like I said earlier about hearsay, and one of the places we go to as our host has mentioned, we look at reviews. If I'm going on Amazon, I'll want to buy the one that has the best reviews, right? Well, we have Google reviews of schools, and more often than not, you'll find that it's those students who are scorned, those students who didn't do as well as they wanted to do, and they go on Google and they put the worst reviews about the school or the teacher. So be very wary of those. The second is, yes, there are some rating systems. The Fraser Institute is one of them. There are a wide variety of other like real estate agents even will keep track of school reputations. What ends up happening again is that those are governed by very limited factors. In the public school system, they only really look at the EQAO data for grade 9 math, grade 6 and grade 3 EQAO data, or the grade 10 literacy test. But that data really is can sometimes be very skewed, sometimes can be very inaccurate. For example, one school I worked at previously, there's a very large number of immigrant students. And so the OSSLT, or the grade 10 literacy test data, was not really forthcoming or foretelling of the full school environment. So if I was making a decision based on that one data piece without knowing that 60% of the school is an immigrant population, then I would be misled. So being very careful about that. But again, go to the actual school, learn about them, learn about the environment. Even some parents or families want to move into a specific area because they've heard great things about a certain school. Please do your own research. Do not just go on hearsay from other people. And be very careful about making a decision like that, because as Sister Hanaa mentioned, there's finances involved, there's transportation involved. And if you want to send your child to a school outside of your neighborhood area, outside your neighborhood school, make sure that they can get home at a certain hour, a decent hour, especially during times like this when you're getting by 4:30, it's nighttime. Right? So want to make sure that our kids are safe as well. Public schools do have a lot more courses to offer, but make sure the school you want, that if your child wants those courses, ensure that the school you want to go to actually offers those courses. Oftentimes across North America, you've got competing schools in the same district or the same area. And so based on how many kids come into a school in a given year, they may or may not be able to offer all the courses that they can offer, right? So being very wary of that. Don't just make the assumption that because I'm going to the school, it's a great school, they're going to have all the courses available. No, the number of students coming into a building will determine how many staff are able to be hired for the coming year, and that will determine what courses and how many courses will be offered. Some schools do offer specialized programs, regional choice programs, and some of them can be IBs, the IB program or the Advanced Placement Program, SHSM, which is an Ontario-wide program, Specialist High Schools Major. Those are programs you can definitely look into to see if it's something that is useful or viable. You can definitely speak with the guidance counselors at the high schools to get a little more in-depth information. You can always ask the guidance counselor how many students actually go on to university or college, how many of them are successful when they get to college or university as well. That's another stat you might want to look at as well. You can even, if your child wants to go to Ryerson University or any university, I shouldn't mention one, but any university, call up the university, call up that college and say, the kids coming from this school, how many of them actually graduate after the 4 years? They have that data available. So, just making those calls and doing some research on your own, as Sister Hanaa mentioned, the onus really comes back to the family to do the research on their own and personalize their research to what they are looking for their children.
So, mashallah, again, it's all about initiative. You got to go, and it's not just one. I like how you mentioned not to focus only on one or two points, like that you focus on EQAO tests or something else that could skew that. You got to look at it from a whole big picture. And because again, putting your child into school is not like a one day thing, one day decision that you just toss them in there and that's that. And you just, dust your hands off and everything is good to go. No, there's a whole process, a whole system if you want to make a well-informed decision, subhanAllah. So I'm going to leave it to you two. One last final question. Let's go to Sister Hanaa. Let's say right now who's watching, let's say there's a Muslim parent, there are Muslim parents watching this. They're looking to you, Sister Hanaa. They say, mashallah, you've got a lot of experience with counseling, social work, and you've seen a lot of things with our youth. And, we're scratching our heads, unsure of what to do. Are there any sort of parting words of advice that you found just based not only on your upbringing, but with your professional experience that you would have for these Muslim families or parents that would make the process of selecting which path to take that much easier? What advice would you have for them?
It's such a big question, and to compact it, I've tried to put some notes together on it. I think we've already touched upon it today. Brother Omar also mentioned, and I mentioned, academics is not everything. And I think this is what I'm seeing more and more of those pressures put on young people, that it is everything. And I think that's part of our immigrant experience, because when, our families came to Canada, this was expected, and our parents worked very hard to get where they are. So there's that expectation that children are going to do the same thing. They're going to become the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, and it's a lot of pressure. So I think parents really want them to be well informed about what's important to them. If it is character and it is the deen, if it's Islam, first of all, that's going to come from home. You have to start modeling it from home first. And teach children how to, we're human beings, we have to be human first and learn about emotional intelligence. That's a big word that's going around. Our children are growing up with the devices. They're going to learn. They're going to learn everything. But what they're not going to learn is all the social aspects of life, the social emotional skills, the problem solving skills, teamwork. All of that is so important to take them very, very far in their future lives, inshallah. It doesn't matter where they go. So I don't want to say that one thing over the other. families have to look at their own dynamics, their own expectations, and also what they are willing to put into that investment of their children, inshallah.
So mashallah, like a lot of focus is on IQ, but it's also equally important to think about EQ, right? Emotional intelligence too. So that's very well spoken, especially it's very timely now with COVID-19 where social interactions are cut drastically, right? So we got to really make the most of it. So it just really highlights and emphasizes that part, you know. Subhanallah, good point, mashallah. And I'll take it home, brother Omar. Someone's watching the show, a Muslim parents looking at you saying, mashallah, man, you've done it all. You got your hand on the private sector. You're here in the public. I want to enroll my child in public school, but I don't know what to do. What advice would you have for that individual, for that family? What parting gem of advice have you found to be true and true again that's worked beautifully for you and for others that you've seen that you would like to impart for those Muslim families to make their decisions and to make the path that much easier for them?
Jazakallah khairan. I'm going to piggyback on what Sister Hanaa mentioned at the very end there. And forgive me, this advice I'm going to give is not specific to schooling, actually. It's going to be more of advice around family. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, what has propelled me through my journey in education has been seeing, understanding, working with kids and their families and the communities that we all inhabit, and how we support each other and work with each other to help our kids become successful, again, not just academically, socially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, so on and so forth. The advice I'd like to give is to invest in your children, as Sister Hanaa mentioned. Take the time to learn and spend time and to parent your children, to be there with them and to make sure that the home itself is the place that provides that sense of belonging. So often kids are looking for a sense of belonging at school. And if their peer group fails them, or they have a bad test, or the teacher is not that great, or they're not able to find a good social group to hang out with, that can have a detrimental impact if that's the only source for them in terms of finding stability and that sense of belonging. When we make the home environment that to represent and to be the cocoon and that nest and the bubble inside the home, to feel that warmth, to feel that love in the home, that is what will propel success no matter what school that we send our kids to, whether it's private Islamic, public, or even homeschooling for that matter. That's also a type of schooling, right? So really it comes down to creating a home environment that supports our kids every way that we possibly can. Yes, it's a full-time job, which parenting definitely is, but that really would be my word of advice. Yeah, part of my career was 10 years as a guidance counselor, and that's where this advice is coming from. Having worked with so many different families, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, in different parts of Peel, both south and north ends of Peel, really it comes down to what is the child going home to, where's the child coming from when they come to school, and that is what protects them. That's what takes care of them. That's what helps them to be successful long term. So Jazakallah khair, and I hope that resonates with everybody here.
Look at that, mashallah. See that? So east or west, home is best. It all starts from the home and it goes out, mashallah, man. Jazakallah khair, brother Omar. No matter how much you try to hammer it home, it needs to be said, as always. You know, at the end of the day, home and the school's got to be on the same page. It can't be this diametrically opposing. The school is telling you to do one thing, the home is telling you to do another thing. And then, you know, I'm sure as you heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a kid, but nowadays, where's that village? It seems like everybody's off to do their own thing, and it's like, well, then where are you gonna leave the brother or the sister or that child? So Jazakallah khairan as always, man. Mashallah, both of you, phenomenal. Really, really appreciate both of you sharing your insights and perspectives. Want to say thank you so much, mashallah. I hope and pray for our viewers that this has been something of tremendous benefit for them and for us all. So subhanAllah, it's been a real eye-opening conversation, but this conversation isn't over. It's not a one-time fix. It's not a one-time thing. It's not just, okay, I saw it once and that's that. So I want to share with you all actually one little thing about myself, if I may. Alhamdulillah, I've been very fortunate to be raised in the public school. If you were wondering, where's this host, this guy? I was born and raised here in Canada. I was actually raised in the public school system. And so with that, I think it speaks to what Brother Omar was mentioning and what Sister Hanaa was hearkening towards, is that it's not just the environment is one thing, but alongside that, it's who you become, right? It's who you become as a person. You take control of your own education. That's the key. You take control of your own education. That was one of the greatest advice I ever got for that, is that no one's going to spoon feed you. If you leave you are what you make of it, right? Like whatever situation you're in. So if private Islamic school is best for you, mashallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the best in that. If public school is where your circumstances are, make the most of it. Make the most of it. But like Brother Omar was mentioning, the key to this puzzle piece that cannot be ignored is the home, the family, the one that they, when the kids run home, run to after, let's say they depart from that school bus and they run and they, embrace the parent or guardian that's with them. That's the key. If that's missing, doesn't matter where you go, right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our education system to be always on point. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our Muslim families to make the best decisions for them, and to raise our future generations of Muslims as leaders for themselves, and to be the betterment and serving the community in the best way possible, in a positive way. And it all starts with education. That's all that matters. And so with that, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is your brother, Muhammad Maxwell Hassan, signing out. Stay safe, stay strong, and stay proud to be Muslims, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.